what has happened with the new defense pact, you know, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, they have signed a new agreement between the three, a defense pact as they call it. And this is happening basically while we have this conflict with this war between Iran and the United States, which is part of, in my opinion, it is the whole concept of having a defense pact is part of the ongoing conflict in that region. But looking at what is going on basically with these three countries, what comes to your mind? Why do they need? What does Saudi Arabia need to do this?
Well, we know that recent or previously, after Israel conducted strikes on Qatar against the negotiation party representatives from Hamas in the negotiations for a ceasefire in Gaza, that Saudi Arabia went into an agreement, a security pact, not as formal as this, with Pakistan. So what we're seeing now is the further development of that relationship, plus the addition of now Turkey in what most people are describing as a NATO-like Article 5 similar pact between Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan, that an attack on one would be an attack on all. And this doesn't only secure Saudi Arabia's security interests in the region, when you're considering threats from potential threats from the Houthi rebels and Ansar Allah in Yemen. But in Turkey's mind, this is also a security agreement against potential aggression from Israel, because we know that Israel has threatened aggression against Turkey. So really, this is a pact that is continuing to form what I have considered from the beginning of this war, because of the potentiality of the national powers, world powers at play, that we are entering very much in a very literal sense World War III. So when you look at this most recent alliance, you now have Pakistan, you now have Turkey, you now have Saudi Arabia. Pakistan and Turkey are nuclear powers. They possess nuclear weapons. They also possess very large and capable armies, ground forces, and air forces that have significant reach, that have modern aircraft, Generation 5 fighter aircraft.
If I'm not mistaken, Turkey doesn't have nuclear weapons. Just Pakistan has the nuclear weapons in the region, in the whole region.
So that when you consider the within Turkey, nuclear power, and you consider in Saudi Arabia their now pursuit of nuclear power, nuclear nations in terms of that they have the infrastructure in terms of weaponized nuclear warheads capable of firing a nuclear weapon, a nuclear missile. Pakistan is the player that has that capability in this new entente, this triple entente. But when you look at the alliance that's now forming out of this conflict with Iran, that the United States initiated on February 28th, this conflict is now out of the hands. It's no longer up to Donald Trump, the president of the United States, as to when and how this conflict ends. There are now other interests, other national powers, other interests at stake that go beyond what the United States may consider this war ending or not. Which, when you look at how this war began and where we are now, 5.5 months into what was considered to be a few days or a couple weeks war, we now have alliances forming that are quite formidable when you think of the nations that are now aligning. Turkey, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, not by no means nations that you should consider light on military power.
Yeah. The question is, Tony, and is that with what's going on, how do you find the policies in Washington? And we know that there is some sort of agreement between Iran and Oman with the case of the Strait of Hormuz. and but it doesn't seem that, I don't know how much of what's going on is going to be acceptable for Washington. What is your understanding of the new regime, of the new mechanism that Iran and Oman are defining, and the United States reaction to that?
Yes, we know that as the conflict went escalatory and went hot again in the previous weeks, that Iran stayed focused on what they felt as the strategic importance, which is the Strait of Hormuz, and going in and formalizing the agreement with Oman to gain cooperation. So it's not just now Iran saying that this is how things are going to be. There's now cooperation with Oman. That cooperation will then lead to further cooperation from Gulf states, which you could then see a divide politically, diplomatically, politically, with Saudi Arabia in terms of what Saudi Arabia will agree to with this Strait of Hormuz. If you look at the Persian Gulf here, Saudi Arabia has a significant coastal border and is a significant player in the Persian Gulf, and will have a say in terms of how this mechanism that Oman and Iran will manage. But Saudi Arabia will certainly have a say in what that framework looks like, or at least the ability to enforce that framework going forward. So it's not just it doesn't just die with the piece of paper that it's written on, that it actually is enforceable. Saudi Arabia has now interests that are directly impacting them based on the Strait of Bab el-Mandab, that is obviously backed by Iran. So there's friction there. So I think even more so as we see an agreement or an administrative agreement for the Strait of Hormuz, that will cause even potentially more friction and divide between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia's interests may not necessarily align to what the United States may want from this, because, to be clear, Donald Trump wants out of this war. Iran knows that if this war continues and that Donald Trump's feet are held to the fire, that it's going to greatly impact the midterm elections in the United States in November. That is a factor that Iran keeps in mind. So, in the case of Saudi Arabia with the Strait of Hormuz, what the United States may be willing to accept that is acceptable in terms of negotiation may not be acceptable for Saudi Arabia, now that this greater conflict has evolved past just the nation states of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. So now this is putting in contention to where, again, the end of this war, how it ends, the conditions upon which it ends, is no longer up to Donald Trump and the United States of America and the might of the U.S. military. It is now, instead of just trying to come to a cooperative agreement or a 14-point plan or a peace deal between the United States and Iran, well, now you have to consider the inherent interests of other powerful nations, which makes negotiations more complex and often more complicated. And the United States thus far has not demonstrated a good track record in negotiating this conflict.
Yeah, part of this conflict is what's going on with Saudi Arabia. As you mentioned, Saudi Arabia is in some sort of active conflict with Iraq and Yemen. And moments ago, we've learned that the Iraqi resistance was supposed to attack Saudi Arabia today. It seems that they're somehow under pressure from the Iraqi government, and as an organization there. They call it Badr organization in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq.
In Iraq, yes.
And yeah, these two put pressure on the Iraqi resistance not to attack Saudi Arabia today. It says that it was postponed by them. But the question would be, Tony, do you see the moment that the Saudi Arabia would back down? The whole case of the war on these two fronts started with Saudi attack on Yemen. And right now you see how the war is not bringing any sort of benefit to Saudi Arabia. Is that going to force them to back down or maybe remove the siege in Yemen?
So I don't think that we're going to see any direct relation between an action and the forcing of another asymmetric appendage back down based on the vis-a-vis action from one to the other. Because what we see now, Yemen, you cannot clearly delineate Yemen between Saudi Arabia is on this side, Yemen's on this side, and by side I don't mean geographically, I mean in terms of conflict. You have the Houthis, and let's remember the Houthi front, the Houthi movement is much more than just a militarized or a fighting arm. They are also politically representative in the Yemeni government. So then you have Ansar Allah, which within that there are conflicting interests that may go beyond what the government aims are or the political aims. So I don't think we're going to see a very clear, if this organization says this, that the asymmetric arm of that will do this, because maybe 2 months ago that alliance in terms of we say this, you do this, that chain of command, if you will, was intact. Now it is not, because Saudi Arabia is not just directly involved with the conflict in Yemen. Saudi Arabia is also asymmetrically involved because of their backing of the Khadramat Tribal Alliance and those factions within, which are also in contention against the Southern Tribal Council, which is backed by the UAE. So those second and third order effects of conflict that leads to tertiary conflicts within Yemen are not necessarily brokered or done based on, hey, we'll agree to that, will you agree to this? Well, the clearness of that path has now been muddied based on this growing conflict that quite frankly, I think that this is something that this is a consideration that the United States of America should have seen from day one, which would have been another reason along the list of reasons as to why not to start this war. And to your point with the Badr organization within Iraq, the Badr organization, established with the assistance or the direct support of the IRGC in the 80s, that then grew into the Badr brigades and the Badr Corps. These are organizations that that as a U.S. Army officer in Iraq confronted in terms of this fighting force and this capability. So do these Badr brigades, these what you would consider these Iranian proxies or these pro-Iranian or Iranian-lined Shia organizations, do they have the capacity and the capability to really inflict damage or to cause harm to Saudi Arabia? They absolutely do. But that then elicits a greater response from Saudi Arabia. And now that Saudi Arabia is going into this agreement, this NATO-like Article 5 agreement with Turkey and Pakistan, that's something now that all of the nations, whether you're the Houthis, whether you're Iran, whether you're the Iranian-backed organizations and brigades in Iraq, that all now have to consider, because that can then spark an even greater global war where you now have one of these nations, being Turkey, as a member of NATO.
Yeah, the reaction from the Iranian, as it was mentioned by Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi, he said that Iran's powerful armed forces have shown their readiness, capability, and might in face of the world's most expensive military. He's talking about the United States, of course. When Muslims stand together, we can face every challenge by malicious outsider head on. Is this the time to rely on ourselves and embrace true brotherhood? The reaction is so positive. They're seeing that whatever is happening, between Turkey and Saudi Arabia, between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, that's positive for the region. This is in the eyes of Iranians, which are in an active war against the United States. Do you think that that could that could help in a long run to somehow maybe, I don't know, one of the main goals of Iran with the attacks on American bases into region, and right now with the new mechanism in the Strait of Hormuz, is to limit the U.S. access to the Persian Gulf, and then with the limitation coming along, it means that they're not going to send any weapon to the bases and reactivating the bases. This is the main goal. But the other point is, how practical is that for the United States to get back? And maybe that's why Saudi Arabia has decided to do this. They started with Pakistan first, and right now they're expanding the treaty, the defense pact. Turkey is coming in. I don't know who else gonna be next. Maybe Qatar, maybe Kuwait, Bahrain. I don't know, later on, maybe all of them together. I don't see UAE being part of this for the time being, but I even don't see Iran. Why Iran cannot be part of this? They can all come together. Is that gonna? Do you see that happening in a long run?
That's an excellent observation, Nima, and something that I think that most aren't considering in terms of what comes next. And what I will say is that I think that will be the case. I don't think it's a matter of if. I think it's simply a matter of when this coalition, if you will, this alliance grows. So going back to the point you made at first with the comments of Minister Arachi, we're 160 days into this war, and Iran has demonstrated to not only the region but to the world that Iran, despite sanctions, despite superior military force in terms of the size of militaries being the United States and the technology and the military advancements of Israel, that Iran has stood against that and has stood against it quite well. Iran is nowhere near defeat. Iran is nowhere near capitulation. And that has demonstrated to the world that, especially if you're in the region, but also to the world, Iran is not going anywhere. Iran will dictate Iran's terms in terms of its government, in terms of its leadership, in terms of its sovereignty, in terms of what it wants to pursue diplomatically, politically, economically on the world stage, worldwide, globally, and regionally. The world has taken notice to that. So to your point, this alliance that's forming now between Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey isn't just an alliance that's to what Western media will depict as this entente to face Iran. That's not necessarily the case. This is the alliance of a coalition to be the future of security guarantee, of security in the region without the United States. This alliance growing is not necessarily in its intent a response to or a defense against Iran. This is more so a defense to future influence and encroachment by the United States in the region, where powers in the region have made it clear, United States, your word is no longer valuable here. You didn't defend us in this war with like these agreements. When you look at these nations, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, these nations don't have U.S. bases there because they bleed red, white, and blue and they love America. It's transactional. You want to have your bases here? We want security guarantees. Protect us and defend us. The United States turned its back on these allies at a critical time, in the face of which Iran is still standing. Iran's still there. Iran still has the ability to reach out and strike any one of these nations. In fact, with the Khorram Shah 4 ballistic missile, Iran can reach all the way to the fronts of Northern Europe and Central Africa. and they still have that capability, and it hasn't been defeated, and it hasn't been destroyed. So what some may see right now, especially in the Western world, through the Western perspective, this alliance is growing because of big bad Iran. That's not the case. This alliance is forming and will grow. And to your point, I think the next nations we'll see join could be Qatar, Bahrain, eventually even Kuwait, and then surely potentially Iran, and then if Iran, there too comes Iraq. And if you consider this alliance, it's more so a response to the United States no longer being the guarantor of security in the region, but now these nations looking for another way, another solution that does not include the United States. So to your point, your conclusion, your hypothesis, I agree with you that that is the future of this, not a matter of if, but simply a matter of when.
Yeah. Is that going to change, Tony, the long run strategy of the United States in the West Asia? How is that going to influence the United States and its I would say unwavering support for Israel in the region? With under the Trump administration, in my opinion, that's not going to change the support for Israel. Or maybe with the new moves in the United States, basically in Democratic Party, for example, what is going on is significant in my opinion. But after all, putting that the inside, what's going on internally in the United States, putting that aside, which we will talk about it later on, but focusing on the West Asia, how is that going to influence the decision makers in the United States?
Well, that's a great question. We're already seeing that in some of the elections here in the United States, in the primaries, going into the midterms in November, particularly in Michigan just this week, where Americans are waking up to the influence of APAC, to the influence of Israel in in domestic politics and domestic governance, to where it's very clear that wars like this one, wars like this war with Iran, that we were absolutely manipulated, controlled, pulled into, gaslit, if you will, by Israel into this war. Iran is 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon. Iran is the greatest threat to the region. Iran this, Iran that, etc. And many Americans are waking up to the fact of those lies and that influence, and it is having an impact on elections on the domestic front. I think that the midterm elections in November are going to look much different than most Republicans, or quite frankly, most Americans thought it would look like come November, with independents and Democrats and or alternative Republicans that aren't taking money from APAC or influenced by Israel will win. I think we're already seeing that in the midterms. To a point that you made as in this question, I think it's important to understand that the United States military, it's not just a bunch of folks in uniform that are saying, yes, sir, let's bomb this and let's bomb that. You have very educated and intelligent officers that are strategic planners. And I know this for a fact. I will guarantee you that prior to this conflict, officers in the joint staff, whether it was the joint staff within the Pentagon or the joint staff within Central Command, looked at all of these factors. They looked at all of these factors. In fact, I constantly hit on the aspects of national power, diplomacy, information, the military, and the economy. Joint planners look at that when they're considering the cost of war. And if you prior to the 28th of February, if you're a joint planner, red teaming this, meaning you are role playing in the opposition to say, hey, how will the opposition respond, or what are the fallouts of our choices? And if you consider this, on February 27th, before we launched this war on the 28th, any practical, intelligent, educated joint planner would be able to say, hey, the Strait of Hormuz. That's going to be a factor in this. We cannot simply write that off because we don't want to consider the implications. What if this conflict doesn't end in a few days and the Strait of Hormuz becomes more of an impact? Well, impacts to the Strait of Hormuz then force global nations to seek alternate pathways. That then brings Bab al-Mandab into question, which has influence from the Houthis and Ansar Allah. You're then bringing in other nations that have concerns and influence. What if the United States loses its security footing? And then how does that impact the United States domestically with the elect? I guarantee you that in red teaming this, there were officers that looked at this, because even back in 2015, when we looked at Operation Millennium Challenge, those were some of the considerations that came out of a war game and looking at what a war with Iran could look like for the United States in the world and domestically. And a lot of these conclusions, a lot of these lessons learned are exactly what we're seeing. So when you look at that, and it wasn't because senior leaders within the United States military, missed the mark or were way off. It's because the administration didn't listen. The administration didn't take their own military advice into account. So whose advice did they take? Well, it's very clear that the U.S. administration, mostly the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States, took the advice and the intelligence or the disinformation of Israel. And a lot of Americans are now seeing that, because there are many Americans that know this doesn't seem like something that the United States military at its highest ranks of the Joint Staff would have led our nation into. So who influenced our president? Was it AIPAC? Well, that's something we don't want in our politics anymore. So yes, it is impacting the United States domestically, and it will continue to do so, because like I said, the conclusion of this war, how this war ends, when it ends, is no longer up to Donald Trump in any way. Donald Trump can squirm and wiggle and politically maneuver all he wants to get out of this conflict. He is stuck in this, and it's no longer up to him.